Okay, so we did part 1, and now we are going to be moving on to part 2. So you can just select part 2, or at the very bottom of the page from the last video, if you look down here, there is this previous page, next page button. You can hit next page, and that'll take you on to part 2. If you want to go back to part 1, you would just hit the previous page button. So the life of a tree ring scientist. Each scientist working today was influenced and inspired in some way to enter their profession and commit to a lifelong quest to advance our knowledge of the universe. Some had a parent or teacher, relative, or other mentor start them on this path. Some grew up loving to discover how things work or enjoyed solving puzzles. Others simply awed by nature and were drawn in by an impulse to understand its workings. Whatever the reason, it takes a curious and creative mind and scientific training to conduct meaningful research. Every research effort begins in the mind of a scientist who asks a simple question or a series of questions which they are driven to answer. How do these questions arise? What drives them to travel across the globe in search of answers to their questions? How do they choose these sites, and what types of trees do they use for their research? In this activity, you will hear 2 accomplished dendrochronologists describe their career path, the best and most challenging aspects of being a scientist. Then you will explore 4 important tree ring research sites around the world and consider what characteristics these sites have to make them useful to scientists to learn about our climate and how it's changed in the past. So first, we're going to listen to Dr. Ed Cook talk about what it means to be a scientist.
My name is Edward Cook. I'm the director of the Lamont Minority Earth Observatory Tree Ring Laboratory. I was the usual geek who liked to chase butterflies and hunt fossils, hunt for fossils, that sort of thing. So I was always sort of oriented in that direction. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And that's why I was in this more general biological sciences curriculum to begin with. I started at Trenton Junior College, very close to my home in New Jersey. I spent 2 years there, and then I transferred out to the University of Arizona as a major in wildlife biology. And then after that, I went into the Army for 3 years, came back out, went out to Arizona for a master's degree. That's the time when I did my research up at Mohonk Lake and the Humpty Dumpty Tail slope location. Well, I think it's, Richard Feynman talked about curiosity as a driver of scientific research. And if you have curiosity about the way things work and don't understand how they work, you try to find ways to investigate the topic that you're interested in. It's kind of a curiosity-driven pursuit, really. The most fun, in a sense, is the field work, because in dendrochronology, we have to go out in the field and sample the trees, and the trees might be in your backyard, or they might be in Bhutan, in the Himalayan mountains of Asia. So you get to go all over the world if you're lucky and fortunate and successful. And that can be a blast, just going out and seeing new forests, experiencing the different cultures and doing the work in the field. A lot of the lab work can be slow and tedious, and occasionally boring. But, the field work really kind of is the big payoff in a sense, aside from the scientific discoveries that you make, in the process of conducting your research. Sometimes, the money available is limited. The competition for the money is extremely high, and you have to spend a lot of time writing proposals to generate new funds to conduct your research. Doing the research itself is fun, but finding the means to conduct the research can be a bit difficult and stressful at times. Well, I think among the bigger things that I've learned over the years is that, well, first of all, you have to follow your interests and your curiosities and things like that. But maybe more importantly than that, you have to take advantage of situations that arise where that can propel your activities, your research further.
Okay, so there's our first guy, and now we're going to talk to Dr. Roseanne D'Arrigo, and she's going to describe her journey to becoming a researcher.
I'm Roseanne D'Arrigo, a dendrochronologist at the Tree Ring Lab at Lamont Doherty. I am a Lamont research professor here, and I'm also the associate director of the Division of Biology and Paleoenvironment. Dendrochronologist studies tree rings, which are the annual growth bands of old growth trees, and we use these to study past climate variability. I really wanted to be a rock star when I was growing up in high school. And I didn't really think about science very much at all. But then I started getting interested in, medical issues, medical problems, what doctors did. So that got me into biology. I didn't like a lot of the pre-med courses, and I just really fell for botany pretty hard because of all the fascinating topics and the aesthetics of it, and also the great teachers, which I thought really stood out. So I just sort of started getting immersed in that. What keeps me going is that the Earth's climate system is limitless. So I never feel that we've all learned as much as we need to know. There always seems to be a new problem, a new question about what makes it work. So I feel that I've never been bored, and I've never felt limited by the topic. I think the best part of being a scientist is to explore questions that really interest you and that tell you more about the world, and also the freedom of being a scientist, because in many cases you can sort of create your own agenda and create the kinds of problems and topics that you want to work on. Well, that's a little tougher to answer. Some of the challenges for people that work on what they call soft money is that you need to keep coming out with great ideas that will be funded, so that can provide salary for you to continue as a scientist. In my particular case, I would say that is one of the great challenges, to keep up with the science, to keep up with the very quickly and rapidly increasing number of articles in the literature as the science has continued to expand in the world of global change. My advice to students interested in going into science, or pretty much anything, is to follow what really turns you on. I mean, if you have something that you love to do, but you feel like, well, I don't know if I could ever make a career out of this, find a way to make a career out of this. That would be one piece of advice, and don't let anybody stop you in that quest. The other thing would be to learn how to take rejection well. If you've had a grant or an article rejected, take the advice that you think is constructive, and don't take the rest of it personally, and just move on.
All right, so moving on here, we can answer a couple of our stop and think questions. So this is going to be on that Google form. What are the best parts about being a scientist, as described by Dr. Cook and Dr. D'Arrigo? So both of them talk about field work and how it can be in exotic locations all over the world, being a big payoff in tree ring research, and also experiencing different cultures. And Dr. D'Arrigo talked about the importance of scientific freedom that scientists have, and the ability to explore questions that interest you instead of, studying what someone else wants you to study. I know that when I was in college, I had both a zoology and a botany class, and the zoology teacher, she frequently went to Madagascar and she studied lemurs. And she said that was a huge kind of payoff for her, because she always wanted to go to these exotic locations, and now she gets to hang out with monkeys. And she showed us all kinds of pictures of herself and them just climbing all over her. And she also talked about how she had malaria as well, so she got to experience something new, even though it was a bit unpleasant. But the same with my botany teacher. He went to random places around the world, and he did some pretty in-depth studies of different plants. Like, one place would be Hawaii, even though that's not, such an exotic location. If you think about it, though, the plants and animals on Hawaii, they're basically stuck there. You don't see a lot of those plants in other places around the United States or even around the world. They're kind of in their own little bubble. It's just pretty interesting stuff. Number 2, what are some challenging aspects of being a scientist as described by these two scientists? Well, the lab work can be tedious and boring, and they both talked about funding, how you have to have funding through the government agencies to cover your salary, your research program, and the staff and students. It takes time and it can be stressful. They talked about how you always have to come up with these new ideas to keep people interested and keep people wanting to give you money. And question number 3, what advice do Dr. D'Arrigo and Dr. Cook have for students who are thinking about a career in science? They say you should follow your interest and curiosity and take advantages of situations as they arise. If you have something you love to do, find a way to make it a career and learn how to take criticism well, because not everybody is going to agree with you, and it's actually sometimes those critics who push you to be better. You need to, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Okay, moving on here, explore research sites. One aspect of tree ring science that appeals to many is, in fact, that your workplace is out in nature, among the trees at sites all over the world. Exploring a prospective site is always a critical early step to determine whether it is suitable for answering the research questions that interest you. This involves traveling to sites located in rugged terrain in far-flung regions across the globe that often have harsh climates. Explore 4 different important tree ring research sites by right-clicking the buttons below and opening them in a new window. And then we're going to be answering those 2 questions based off of the sites. Okay, so we're giving a brief description of each of the sites and what difficulties might you encounter at each site, assuming you would need to spend 2 full weeks in the field. So those are some things that you'll want to think about. Oh, wow, that's pretty. I mean, I don't know what this is, but that's an interesting hot tub. I feel like this is not really what we want to be looking at. Well, that is what we want to be looking at. So this is the Humpty Dumpty Talus, Hudson Valley, New York. So maybe you don't want to click on these buttons per se, but you want to do more of a zoom in and turn. There we go. Instead of looking at people in swimming pools. And I mean, the hotels look wonderful there, but I don't think that you actually would really be staying in a hotel per se. So that place, whenever we were looking at it, it looked kind of rocky there. It didn't look like it has a whole lot of soil. So maybe some of your issues there would be trying to, navigate the region. You're going to have to do some rock climbing. You're going to have to be maybe good at swimming. Mendel Glacier in Alaska is the next one. Oh boy. So there's a lot of hills there. This one almost looks like it's all rocks and ice. Rocks and ice here. And snow, so it's going to be cold. This particular site has both conditions needed to find temperature-sensitive trees. Alaska is in the northern latitudes and the mountains are high. They're very high. So this site conditions is going to ensure that your ring patterns and the trees are growing here will reflect what the temperature is like, since it is at a higher elevation. Okay, the next one is Fulman Grove. Okay, Okay, so it looks a little bit sandy here. It looks like things are kind of spread out. And also very rocky. All of these locations are quite rocky. So this particular place it's a desert, actually. It's very, very little soil and very dry. It's easy to see that the trees are stressed and they're very slow growing. But these trees are actually the longest lived trees in the entire world, even though they are growing extremely slow and they look a little bit sickly. And the last one here is also, well, this one's in Arizona, the San Juan River site. So it looks like we're currently on a road. There is a really tall, high cliff there on one side. We're surrounded by trees again. Okay. So this place is it has steep walls. It's like a canyon with a river running through it. This particular image was taken during the winter in a dry desert-like site. All right, so for question number 5, what difficulties might you encounter at each site, assuming you would spend 2 full weeks in the field? So that means that you're not staying at a hotel. You're actually like roughing it. You're camping. So things that you would want to maybe take into consideration would be your scientific plan. Where do you plan to sample? How do you know that this is a potentially good site? Are there local scientists that you can work with? And do you need permits to sample the trees and take samples out of a foreign country? You'll also want to think about what to do if someone gets hurt. Do you have a first aid kit? Do you even know how to use it? If you're in a very remote region, would it be smart to bring a satellite phone and know whom you would call in case of emergency? Some field scientists have an emergency evacuation insurance. Think about some provisions you're going to need. Do you have enough food and water for every person on the team? Without enough fresh water, your expedition would quickly be over. You probably wouldn't make it to 2 weeks. Scientists sometimes bring water filters or iodine tablets so they can drink water from local sources like streams and rivers without getting sick. Water can be very heavy, so in many instances, this is the best option instead of actually carrying water with you. Think about the animals before working in a new study area.
Lebowski, please dial 5306. Nicole Lebowski, thank you.
Scientists need to familiarize themselves with critters that live there. So are there scorpions or poisonous snakes, cougars, grizzly bears? What could you possibly come in contact with? And how would you handle an encounter with these creatures? Bear safety is particularly important when working in northern latitudes. Remember, you're in their area, okay? You went into their home. So it's not really fair for you to actually kill them, but you might want to have something to scare them off or tranquilize them with. And clothing. Because scientists travel to remote regions, they need to be prepared for any type of harsh conditions and exposure. You're going to be camping. So you'd want to have some type of a waterproof shell jacket and a couple layers to keep you warm. In northern latitudes, the conditions can be mild, like 70 degrees, or you can wake up with snow on your tent. Scientists need to be prepared for heat, cold, rain, and snow, depending on where they work, and make sure you have good shoes. I'll never forget this, a little off topic, but I went to Disney World whenever I was in high school, and I thought that I would be able to walk around in flip-flops. And what you may not know is that my mother who planned the trip, she is very crazy into planning, and she is going to make sure that you hit every single thing at that location. So I was up from the crack of dawn when the park opened, and we stayed out until it closed. And after that first day, I actually had to go buy tennis shoes because my feet hurt so bad. So make sure you have good, sturdy walking shoes. Okay, moving on, we have 2 questions left. As you heard from Dr. Diarrigo and Dr. Cook above about getting funding can be a challenge for scientists. The expeditions represented in the TREX labs are based off of major field campaigns, most of which were funded by the National Science Foundation or other federal agencies. To apply for a grant to fund your research, the NSF requires that you submit your team's ideas in response to one of its requests for proposals or RFPs. In 15 pages of text, you must make your case. Why is your research important step forward? How does it build on previous work in your field? How will the results of your study be of value to the larger scientific community? And how will your research findings be disseminated? How much will it cost to do the work? Are your goals attainable? Are you qualified to do what you're proposing to do? And do you have a strong team assembled to work with you? Creativity matters. Most people don't think of scientists as a creative field, but the ability to be creative when thinking about how to approach and solve problems is often what results in big gains in knowledge. And this is often what funding agencies like NSF are looking for. Once you submit your proposal, you often wait up to 6 months to see if your proposal has been selected for funding by a jury of your peers. Keep in mind that perhaps hundreds of other scientists are vying for that same limited amount of money. Funding rates for some of these competitive funding projects can be in the 10 to 20% range, so scientists' proposals often get rejected. Successful scientists learn from their rejected proposals. They have to be tenacious, adaptable, and willing to keep refining and improving their ideas. Take a look at the National Science Foundation major research areas called divisions here. Click on one of the research areas that is of interest to you. Then click on the About tab on the left-hand side of the menu and read about the kinds of research that is done with the division. Now go back to the home page of the research area and look at their news feed on the right-hand side. These news articles describe projects that have been funded by the division you chose. Scroll through the news feed and select an article that is of interest to you. Okay, so we're going to click here, then click About. Okay, so there are a lot of different areas, and I should have opened that in a new tab because I want to keep that one here. There we go. Okay, so which one of these areas would interest me the most? I'm going to stick with the biological sciences, and I'm going to go with environmental biology. And then we want to click on the About tab. So you're going to be answering the next two questions based off of whatever tab you guys chose to pick. So it says, briefly describe some of the major goals of the NSF research division that you selected. So I selected the environmental biology research division. So it looks like I would be looking at ecosystem science clusters, somatics and biodiversity, population and community, evolutionary processes. Those are some of the major goals. And then briefly describe a project described in the news article you selected. So here are some papers that were published from different people who were able to get funding. This one seems kind of interesting. Asian butterfly populations show different mimicry patterns thanks to a genetic switch. So I could click on this article here and I would read through it and then I would just describe what happened in the project. And these articles are not terribly long. I mean, look at that one. It's just a couple paragraphs long. So you would read through there and you would summarize it for question number 7. And that is it for part 2.